If you had one chance to give dignity back to a forgotten life, animal or human, would you take it? Even if the rules said no, why should you care? Because someday, every one of us hopes for compassion in our most vulnerable moments. What does it take for a community to do what's right? Not just what's easy. The morning broke gray and cold over Cedar Valley. The sky hung low and heavy, as if echoing the mood inside the animal shelter. Dr. Daniel Brooks had walked these linoleum halls for nearly 30 years, but lately each step felt heavier than the last. Today, the shelter's usual scent of antiseptic and wet fur was sharp with tension. Budget cuts had forced hard choices, and the new director, Linda Evans, had sent out a list. 5 unadopted animals slated for euthanasia before noon. On that list, in blocky, impersonal print, was a 7-year-old German shepherd. No name, just a number and a note. Aggressive, scars, not suitable for adoption. Daniel stood outside the holding area, reading the note twice, then 3 times, as if somehow the words would change. The dog in question was sprawled on a ragged blue towel in the last kennel, silent and watchful. He didn't lunge or bark. Instead, as Daniel approached, the dog's amber eyes followed him, old and wise and wary. The scars across his muzzle and forelegs suggested a hard life, battles survived, and trust broken too many times. "Morning, Doc," called Olivia, the youngest kennel tech, her face pale and anxious. "Linda wants an update. She's checking every room." Daniel nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Tell her I'm making rounds." His voice was steady, but inside he braced himself. He reached the shepherd's cage and crouched low, waiting. The dog lifted his head, sniffed, and then, without fear, rested his head gently on Daniel's outstretched hand. There was a heaviness in that gesture, a strange calm, as if the dog knew exactly what was coming and had accepted it. Daniel swallowed hard. "Hey, big guy, what's your story?" Suddenly, behind him, a crash echoed through the hallway. A smaller dog in the next kennel had knocked over its water bowl. The shepherd didn't flinch, didn't react with aggression, just flicked his ears and closed his eyes, as if the world's noise meant nothing anymore. Daniel's own hands shook as he readied the clipboard. Procedure dictated that he log the animal's temperament before proceeding. But how do you record dignity? How do you mark down the absence of hope? Linda's heels clicked down the hallway, her voice sharp. "Dr. Brooks, I need that room cleared by noon. No exceptions. We have to show we're in compliance. City audit is tomorrow." He looked up at her, feeling the ache of too many sleepless nights, too many lives lost to policy and numbers. "I need more time with this one. Something's off." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Daniel, we can't make exceptions. Not after last week. If we get flagged again," he cut her off, quietly but firmly. "Let me do this my way, please. Just give me till the end of shift." Linda hesitated, then shrugged. "Your call. But if we fall behind, it's on you." The second she left, Daniel exhaled a long, shaky breath. He sat beside the kennel, leaning his back against cold metal, and let the shepherd press his nose into Daniel's palm. The dog's fur was rough, but there was gentleness in his touch. For a moment, Daniel was transported back years, to the day he'd brought home a stray with his son. The feeling of hope when a scared animal first trusted him. That hope had faded after his wife died, after his son left for war and came back changed. Now Daniel was the last of his family in Cedar Valley, holding on to routine as the world kept moving. He glanced again at the shepherd's intake card. No name, no history, but a strange detail, a tiny notch on the left ear, like a military tattoo. He reached for the microchip scanner, hoping for a miracle. The scanner beeped, a number flashed, 4A6X921 RNGR. He stared. RNGR? Ranger? The word stuck in his mind. There was something in those eyes, a depth that went beyond ordinary shelter dogs. He opened his phone, searching the database for the chip. The screen loaded slowly, the signal in the shelter always weak. Minutes dragged by. Olivia appeared, watching from the doorway, concern in her eyes. "Doc, you okay?" He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Finally, the screen popped up. Retired U.S. military service dog. Handler, Sergeant Rebecca Hayes. Last assignment, Afghanistan. Status, discharged with honors. Daniel's breath caught. "You're not just a dog, are you? You're a hero." He whispered the words, feeling the full weight of them settle in the small, sterile room. Suddenly, a new tension filled the air. Two men in city uniforms entered the shelter office, speaking with Linda in hushed, urgent voices. The city's animal control van was parked outside. Had someone tipped them off? Daniel's mind raced. He knew the rules. No last-minute adoptions, no reprieves after euthanasia orders were given. If he was caught stalling, he could lose everything. But as he looked down, the shepherd pressed closer, offering silent trust. Daniel made a decision, one that would change everything. He quietly wheeled the dog into the isolation suite, claiming he needed additional evaluation. "Give me one more day," he murmured. Daniel spent the next hour by the shepherd's side, jotting notes, making calls, combing through paperwork, anything to stall for time. He took a risk and posted a photo to his old Facebook account. "Does anyone recognize this service dog? Last chance for a hero." Within an hour, the post began to spread. A few local veterans messaged, offering to help. Olivia promised to keep quiet, her eyes shining with hope and fear. Outside, thunder rumbled, as if the whole world was holding its breath. As night fell over Cedar Valley, Daniel sat in the darkened isolation room, the shepherd's head resting in his lap. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a flicker of purpose, and for the first time in years, he was willing to risk everything for a lost cause. The line between what was easy and what was right had never been clearer. Night bled into morning at Cedar Valley, painting the world in muted shades of blue and gray. Dr. Daniel Brooks hadn't slept. He'd stayed by the isolation room, listening to the steady rhythm of the German shepherd's breathing, feeling the weight of his own choices. The storm had broken just after midnight, thunder rolling across the prairie, and Daniel imagined that somewhere in the world, someone might finally see the Facebook post he'd made. He hoped, desperately, for a miracle. By sunrise, the shelter was quiet except for the low whimpering of puppies and the restless pacing of cats. Daniel poured himself a cup of stale coffee and sat at his desk, the microchip scanner and paperwork spread before him. He'd printed out everything he'd found: the dog's military record, faded photos of a younger ranger, proud and alert beside a woman in fatigues, Sergeant Rebecca Hayes, Afghanistan, 2016, K-9 unit, awarded for bravery under fire. There was even a medal ceremony. Ranger seated at perfect attention, Rebecca's hand on his shoulder. Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen men and women come home from war, carrying wounds no one else could see. His own son, Tyler, had been among them. Brilliant, funny, forever changed by what he'd survived. Tyler's withdrawal, the silences at the dinner table, the nightmares that shattered the stillness of night. Those memories rose up now, sharp and clear, as Daniel traced the outlines of Ranger's scars. He dialed the last number listed for Sergeant Hayes, hands shaking. A woman's voice, warm but tired, answered. "Hayes residence." Daniel cleared his throat. "This is Dr. Daniel Brooks from Cedar Valley Animal Shelter." I'm trying to reach Sergeant Rebecca Hayes regarding a German Shepherd. Military service dog, chip ending RNGR. There was a pause, then the woman's tone shifted, a heaviness settling in. Rebecca passed away last year. Cancer. This is her mother, Carol. Daniel closed his eyes. I'm so sorry for your loss, ma'am. Ranger is here at our shelter. I wanted to ask about his history, his next of kin. Another pause. Rebecca's brother, Mike, was supposed to look after Ranger. He hasn't been himself since she died, lost his job, moved around. I wish I could help, but we haven't heard from him in weeks. A sense of urgency crawled up Daniel's spine. He thanked Carol, promised to update her, and hung up. For a long moment he stared at the screen. How many stories like this ended quietly, forgotten? He searched public records, piecing together a trail. Mike Hayes, last known address, a battered apartment complex on the city's edge, a grainy Facebook profile, years out of date. He looked nothing like his sister, unkempt beard, sunken eyes, the haunted look of a man barely hanging on. Daniel pressed on, calling the apartment manager. Mike Hayes? Yeah, he's still here. Quiet mostly. Lot of late-night noise. He's behind on rent again. The manager didn't sound hopeful. He still got that big dog? No, Daniel replied. That's why I'm calling. After scribbling down the address, Daniel sat back, weighing his next move. He could feel time slipping away. Linda would expect a decision by noon, and city officials were due for their inspection. He needed answers, and fast. Before leaving, Daniel checked in on Ranger. The dog was curled up in the corner, awake but subdued, eyes flickering open as Daniel entered. For a moment, the room was quiet, except for the sound of Daniel's own heart. He crouched beside Ranger, letting the silence stretch. Listen, buddy, I don't know if I can fix everything, but I promise I'll try. The words felt strange, like a vow made in the dark. He called Olivia to cover his morning rounds and left the shelter in his battered Ford. The drive across town was tense. Rain still drummed the windshield, and Daniel's mind raced with what-ifs. What if Mike refused to talk? What if Ranger was out of time? What if this all ended in paperwork and regrets? Mike's apartment complex was exactly as Daniel expected. Cracked pavement, trash cans overflowing, the faded letters of Willow Grove Estates barely visible on the sign. Daniel parked, took a breath, and climbed the narrow stairs to apartment 2B. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. After a long minute, the door swung open. Mike Hayes stood in the doorway, gaunt and disheveled, a can of beer in his hand. His eyes, bloodshot, hollow, narrowed as he sized Daniel up. Yeah? Mr. Hayes? My name's Dr. Brooks. I'm with the Cedar Valley Animal Shelter. I need to talk to you about Ranger. Mike's jaw clenched. I don't want him. He's not my responsibility. I already told Animal Control. Your sister entrusted him to you, Daniel said quietly. He's not just any dog. He's a hero. Mike's voice cracked, the bravado slipping. You think I don't know that? I couldn't even keep a job after Becky died. I lost everything. The dog, he reminded me of what I lost. I let him go because I couldn't watch him get old and sick. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Daniel studied Mike, the twitch in his jaw, the shaking hands, the anger barely masking guilt and grief. Ranger still has a chance, but the shelter's giving me 72 hours to find a solution, or he's out of time. I need your help to save him. Mike flinched, eyes darting away. What do you want from me? I need you to formally relinquish ownership. Otherwise, he can't be adopted. No rescue, no transfer. It's the law. Mike hesitated, wrestling with shame and resignation. I, I'll sign. Just get him someplace better. Relief flooded through Daniel, but it was fleeting. The paperwork would take time, and Linda was already impatient. As he returned to his car, Daniel pulled out his phone and called the only person who might understand the stakes. Sam Parker, a retired veterinarian and Vietnam veteran. Sam, I've got a situation. You remember those old stories about second chances? I need one now, for a dog and for me. Sam's voice was gravelly but kind. Come by the house. Bring the paperwork. We'll figure it out, Daniel. We always do. Back at the shelter, Daniel explained the situation to Linda. She sighed, annoyed but intrigued when Daniel showed her ranger's military record. I'll give you until Friday, she relented. But after that, we have to follow protocol. That night, Daniel sat with Ranger, exhaustion in his bones, but a flicker of hope burning in his chest. For the first time, he felt he wasn't fighting alone. The next morning, Cedar Valley was caught in that awkward stillness between spring rainstorms, the air heavy and the ground slick with puddles. Inside the shelter, Dr. Daniel Brooks felt every minute ticking away. The 72-hour clock had started, and the fate of a once heroic dog now hung on a tangle of paperwork, a broken man's signature, and the hope that compassion could outlast protocol. Daniel's thoughts were a jumble as he pulled into the cracked driveway of Sam Parker's modest home. Sam's place was the kind of old Minnesota rambler that looked the same for decades. Flag on the porch, a battered truck in the drive, garden gnomes standing sentry under a half-dead lilac bush. The front door was already open, Sam waving from inside with a mug of black coffee. Come on in, Doc, Sam grinned, lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. You look like you wrestled a tornado and lost. Daniel couldn't help but smile. The two men shared a bond forged by years of animal rescues, long shifts at the old clinic, and their sons' stories from different wars. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of coffee, cinnamon rolls, and the slightly musty comfort of a home well lived in. He laid out Ranger's file, the microchip data, and the barely legible paperwork from Mike Hayes. Sam, I need help. This dog, Ranger, he's not just another stray. He's got medals, trauma, a service record. He was Rebecca Hayes' K-9 partner in Afghanistan, but her brother's fallen apart. The paperwork's a mess, and Linda's losing patience. Sam read in silence, frowning, his thumb running over the old military photo. We owe these dogs more than a cold cell and a syringe, you know that. He set the file down. Mike Hayes. I remember him. Football star in high school. Good kid, bad crowd. After Rebecca died, he went off the rails. You want me to come with you? Daniel nodded. I think he'll listen if it's not just me. He needs to see that giving up on Ranger isn't the end. Maybe it's a chance for both of them. An hour later, the two old friends found themselves standing outside Mike's apartment door. The complex was even rougher by daylight. Graffiti on the stairwell, angry voices echoing down the halls. Mike answered after several knocks, looking worse than before. He hadn't shaved, eyes sunken, a tremor in his hand. Mike's jaw tensed. Did you bring the papers? Daniel nodded, holding out the stack. We just want to talk first, Mike. You're not in trouble. We want to help Ranger, and you too. Sam spoke gently, his voice steady as a calm sea. You know, my boy came back from Nam all messed up. Couldn't hold a job, lost his marriage. Thought he'd never forgive himself for surviving. But he did. Sometimes helping somebody, or some dog, get a new shot at life is the best way to find your own. Mike hesitated, then motioned them inside. The apartment was cluttered and dark, a half-eaten pizza on the table, bills piled beside empty beer cans. He sat heavily, face in his hands. Rebecca was the strong one. I was just the mess left behind. I tried to keep Ranger, but every time I looked at him, I saw her, and I saw everything I wasn't. I'm sorry. Daniel placed a hand on Mike's shoulder. No one's blaming you. Ranger's had enough loss. Let's give him a real chance. Mike's fingers shook as he signed the surrender forms. You'll take care of him, right? Don't let him die in there. I promise, Daniel said. He deserves better. So do you, Mike. Sam stood, surveying the sad little apartment. How long you been on your own here, son? Mike shrugged. Since Becky's funeral. I tried going to meetings. I just never stuck with it. Hard to ask for help. Sam dug out a crumpled business card, pressing it into Mike's hand. You ever want to try again? Call this number. Good people. No judgment. I'll vouch for you. Mike nodded, silent tears sliding down his cheeks. With the paperwork finally complete, Daniel drove back to the shelter, a mixture of relief and dread bubbling inside him. The forms meant Ranger could be adopted, transferred, or placed in a sanctuary. But time was running short, and Linda Evans was waiting in his office. Linda stood by the window, arms folded, face a mask of bureaucracy. Did you get what you needed? Daniel handed her the file. It's all there. Ranger's officially relinquished. She glanced through, then paused. What's your plan now, Daniel? He's not a regular dog. He's got PTSD, he's older, and our resources are… I know, Daniel interrupted, but I want an extension. A few more days. I've posted his story online. There's been interest, especially from local veterans and some therapy groups. We can't just throw him away. Linda's eyes softened just a bit. You know how this looks, right? If the city comes down on us, let me worry about that. If there's backlash, I'll take it. But if you give me this chance, maybe we set a precedent. For him, for others like him. She hesitated, then nodded. You have until Monday. If there's no placement by then, I can't hold off the board. But I'll let you run with this. Daniel let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Thank you, Linda. You won't regret it. That evening, Daniel updated the shelter's Facebook page with Ranger's full story. Photos from his service, his time with Sergeant Hayes, the heartbreak of losing his family, and his need for a new mission. The post caught fire, shares multiplying, comments pouring in from veterans, military families, animal lovers. One message from a trauma counselor named Dr. Jane Miller offered help. Ranger might respond to gentle therapy. If you want to try, I'll volunteer my time. By midnight, Daniel scrolled through the outpouring of support. Hope, real hope, blossomed in his chest. Maybe Ranger's story wasn't over. Maybe against all odds, there was still a bridge between the past and a future worth living. Sunday morning sunlight poured in through the tall windows of the Cedar Valley Animal Shelter, illuminating dust motes that danced above the rows of kennels. For the first time in weeks, Dr. Daniel Brooks felt a cautious optimism. Ranger's story had sparked a wave of support from the community and drawn offers of help, but it was clear the journey ahead would not be easy. Ranger was sitting in the back corner of his kennel, head low but eyes alert. His massive frame seemed even larger in the cramped space, but he made no move to approach as Daniel opened the gate. Instead, he watched every motion, body taut, like a spring wound tight. Daniel approached slowly, kneeling so he was eye level with Ranger. Hey buddy, let's get some air. His voice was gentle, steady, the same tone he'd used with nervous patients for decades. Ranger hesitated, then stood, moving stiffly to Daniel's side. Together they walked out into the spring morning, past the clusters of barking dogs and curious volunteers. The shelter's yard was still muddy from recent storms. As they stepped outside, a sudden shout rang out from the parking lot. A volunteer dropped a box, sending cans clattering across the concrete. Instantly, Ranger flinched, dropping to the ground and trembling, ears pinned back. The flash of panic in his eyes was unmistakable. Daniel crouched beside him, laying a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay. You're safe." He stayed like that until Ranger's breathing slowed, muscles relaxing just enough for him to stand again. Inside, Linda Evans watched from her office window, concern softening her usual no-nonsense expression. She saw the haunted look in Ranger's eyes, but she also saw something else. A flicker of trust when Daniel spoke, a fragile hope that had survived unimaginable hardship. Later that afternoon, Dr. Jane Miller arrived, her calm presence instantly soothing. She introduced herself to Ranger with patience, sitting cross-legged in the grass and letting him approach at his own pace. "I work with veterans and with therapy dogs," she explained to Daniel. "PTSD is complicated, but dogs like Ranger, they understand more than we realize." They started small, slow walks around the shelter, gentle games of fetch with a soft tennis ball, even just sitting together in the quiet garden behind the building. Progress was slow and sometimes invisible. Ranger startled at loud noises, barked at shadows, and often paced the perimeter of the yard as if searching for an exit. At night, he whimpered in his sleep, paws twitching, lost in dreams Daniel could only imagine. Daniel recognized the signs. He saw them in the soldiers who came home to Cedar Valley. Men and women who jumped at car alarms, who couldn't sit with their backs to a door, who carried ghosts no one else could see. He felt echoes of his own loneliness, the silence that filled his house after his wife died and his son left, the hollow ache that even work couldn't fill. In the evenings, after the shelter closed, Daniel brought Ranger to the local senior center, a low brick building surrounded by flowering dogwoods. The director, Mrs. Schmidt, greeted them with a warm smile and a plate of oatmeal cookies. At first, Ranger stayed close to Daniel's side, wary of the new faces and smells, but slowly, day by day, something shifted. An elderly veteran named Mr. Carlyle, wheelchair-bound and stoic, took a liking to Ranger. "Used to have a shepherd just like him," he said, voice gravelly with age. He reached out, letting Ranger sniff his hand before scratching gently behind his ears. For the first time, Ranger's tail gave a tentative wag. The next week, a small group of seniors waited for Ranger's visits. They shared stories from their youth, tales of lost pets and old friends, while Ranger listened, head resting on their laps. The dog's presence seemed to ease their aches, soften their grief. Daniel watched, heart swelling with pride and wonder, as a retired war dog became a source of comfort for people who needed it most. But healing was not a straight line. One stormy afternoon, thunder rattled the windows just as Ranger entered the main room. In an instant, he bolted, frantic, nearly knocking over a table as he tried to escape. The seniors watched in alarm as Daniel hurried after him, finally catching up in a side hallway. Daniel knelt, breathing hard. "You're okay, Ranger. It's just thunder." He held the trembling dog, memories of his son's panic attacks rising unbidden. "You're not alone. Not anymore." Jane joined them, speaking softly. "He's reliving trauma, just like people do. The difference is, he doesn't understand why. But every time you help him through it, you're building trust." As the days passed, The bond between Daniel and Ranger deepened. They fell into a rhythm: morning walks, therapy sessions with Jane, afternoons at the senior center, and quiet evenings in Daniel's office. Sometimes Daniel talked aloud, about his wife, about Tyler, about regrets and second chances. Ranger listened, never judging, always present. One evening, as Daniel locked up, Linda found him sitting on the floor, Ranger's head in his lap. "You're putting in a lot of extra hours," she observed, her voice unusually gentle. Daniel smiled wearily. "He needs me. Maybe I need him too." Linda nodded, her own expression unguarded. "It's good to see you both healing. Keep going, Daniel, for both your sakes." For the first time in a long time, Daniel didn't feel alone with his memories. In the quiet company of a scarred old dog, he found the beginnings of peace and the fragile hope that even the deepest wounds could heal, with time, patience, and a little help from friends, both two-legged and four. By the end of May, Cedar Valley began to shake off the chill of spring, and a sense of renewal drifted over the town. For Dr. Daniel Brooks, that feeling was strongest at the shelter, where the daily routines had subtly changed thanks to one dog, Ranger. The German Shepherd, once silent and trembling in the back of his kennel, now walked the halls with a calm dignity that caught everyone's attention. The seniors at the center had started asking when their dog would visit again, and the staff swapped stories about how Ranger seemed to sense when someone was having a hard day. It was in these small, quiet miracles that Daniel first saw the seed of something bigger. The day it bloomed into an idea, he was sitting with Linda Evans in her office, updating paperwork for the city. Linda, usually so brisk and businesslike, paused as she watched Daniel absently scratching Ranger's chin. "I've never seen the residents at the senior center so animated," she remarked. "Even Mrs. White, who barely talks to anyone, asks about Ranger every day." Daniel nodded, thinking aloud. "He's got a gift, Linda. It's more than just obedience. It's like he reads people's moods. I was thinking, what if we could retrain dogs like Ranger? Give them a new job, helping the folks who need them most. Seniors, disabled vets, people struggling with loneliness." Linda pursed her lips. "You want to start a therapy dog program? With retired service dogs?" Daniel shrugged, but there was hope in his eyes. "Why not? Ranger's proof it works. There are other dogs out there, retired, displaced, misunderstood. They deserve a second chance. And so do a lot of people." For a moment, Linda said nothing. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner and Ranger's steady breathing. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "You know the city will never approve more funding for something like this, right? Let's start small, as a pilot. If it works, maybe we find grants or donations to keep it going." Linda sighed, but the spark of possibility flickered in her eyes. "Draft a proposal. I'll see what strings I can pull." Fueled by purpose, Daniel threw himself into research. He reached out to contacts across Minnesota, to veteran groups, therapy dog trainers, and animal behaviorists. He called Dr. Jane Miller, who was thrilled at the prospect and offered to volunteer her expertise. Together, they mapped out a training program: gentle exercises, positive reinforcement, gradual exposure to the sights and sounds of daily life. Ranger was the perfect test case. Daniel and Jane worked with him each day, walking through crowded farmers' markets, sitting with nervous veterans at the local VFW, visiting children's reading hour at the library. Each encounter revealed another layer of the dog's personality: a gentle nudge for comfort, a steady presence during moments of anxiety. Ranger still had scars, both visible and hidden, but he never let them define him. Word spread quickly, Local news picked up the story. Retired war dog brings healing to Cedar Valley. The segment ran on the evening news, showing Ranger sitting quietly beside Mr. Carlyle at the senior center as the old man spoke about losing friends in Vietnam. "He listens," Mr. Carlyle said, voice cracking, like he knows what it's like to lose someone. Daniel was bombarded with calls. People wanted to donate, to volunteer, to nominate dogs and people for the new program. Linda, initially skeptical, watched the momentum build and began to see the project's real value. She spoke with city officials, framed it as a way to improve Cedar Valley's image and serve its most vulnerable citizens. Still, there were challenges. At a city council meeting, Daniel faced skepticism from officials worried about liability, costs, and public perception. "Is this just a feel-good story, or does it really help people?" Councilman Burke demanded. Daniel stood, voice steady. "Ranger is living proof that healing goes both ways. He's not just helping people, he's finding his own place in the world again. That's what this is about. Giving purpose back to those who need it, no matter how many legs they have." One councilwoman, whose father had served in Korea, spoke up. "My dad could have used a dog like Ranger. I support the pilot. Let's see where it leads." The motion passed for a 3-month trial. No additional city funding, but permission to use shelter space and recruit volunteers. Daniel and Jane got to work, screening applicants and matching veterans and seniors with suitable dogs. Training sessions filled the shelter's play yard with laughter and the occasional tear, as people learned to trust again, sometimes for the first time in years. Mike Hayes, Rebecca's brother, heard about the program while flipping through the news at a diner. The sight of Ranger, calm and proud, next to Daniel on TV brought tears to his eyes. He drove to the shelter one morning, hands shaking. "I want to help," he told Daniel. "Maybe clean kennels, whatever you need. I can't change what happened, but maybe I can do some good." Daniel clapped him on the shoulder. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Mike. You and Ranger both." By midsummer, the Cedar Valley Therapy Dog Project, unofficially called Ranger's Way by staff and volunteers, had become the talk of the town. The shelter was busier than ever, the air filled with hope and purpose. Daniel knew there would be setbacks and obstacles ahead. But as he watched Ranger nuzzle a lonely veteran, saw a child smile for the first time in months, he understood that a place of purpose could change more than just one life. It could change a whole community. As the Cedar Valley Therapy Dog Project gained traction, the shelter buzzed with new life. Daniel and Jane worked late every evening, training both dogs and humans, fielding questions from volunteers, and fielding the hopeful but wary eyes of city officials who stopped by for progress updates. Ranger, now a fixture at Daniel's side, radiated a quiet strength, serving as both a living symbol and a gentle companion to those most in need. But with every good thing in Cedar Valley, adversity seemed never far behind. It happened on a gray Thursday morning as Daniel unlocked the shelter's main door. Linda Evans waited inside, her lips tight and brow furrowed in a way that spelled trouble. "We have a problem," she said, voice low. Daniel's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Anonymous complaint," Linda said, sliding a crumpled printout across her desk. "Someone reported irregularities, unorthodox care, a dog being kept past legal hold, posting sensitive cases on social media, improper volunteer supervision. The city's sending an inspector today. If they find grounds, the whole therapy dog program could be shut down, maybe even the shelter itself." Daniel's mind raced. He pictured the council chambers, the rows of skeptical faces, the hundreds of hours he and his team had poured into Ranger's Way. All at risk because someone, jealous, threatened, or just petty, wanted to see them fail. Jane arrived soon after, immediately sensing the tension. "We need to be ready," she said quietly. "If we're transparent, if we show the results, maybe we can turn this around." As the morning wore on, Daniel made his rounds, every sense on high alert. Volunteers tidied the kennels, Olivia double-checked medical records, and Mike scrubbed down the exam room with a nervous energy that bordered on frantic. Just after noon, the inspector arrived, a tall, thin woman named Miss Fleming, with sharp glasses and a sharper tongue. She moved briskly through the shelter, clipboard in hand, her eyes lingering on every out-of-place bowl and frayed blanket. Linda followed, trying to explain the unique circumstances behind Ranger's case and the new therapy program. In the play yard, Jane introduced Fleming to Ranger. The inspector eyed the German shepherd warily. "So this is the dog at the center of all this?" Jane nodded. "He's become our first therapy animal, working with seniors and veterans. He's been instrumental in—" "And how many incidents of aggression have you had?" Fleming interrupted, pencil poised. "None," Jane replied firmly. "He startles at loud noises, but we manage him with trained staff." Fleming's brow arched, skepticism clear. "And who authorized these social media posts? Did you get written consent from all pictured individuals?" Daniel stepped in, voice steady. "The posts were about Ranger's story, with approval from the shelter and the families involved. We've had overwhelming community support, donations, and more volunteer applicants than ever before." Fleming wrote this down, lips pursed. "We'll see what the records say. And I'd like to observe a session. See the animal in action." The staff scrambled to arrange an impromptu visit to the senior center. The air was thick with tension as Fleming trailed Daniel, Jane, and Ranger down the hallways. The seniors, sensing something was amiss, fell quiet as they entered the common room. As if on cue, Mr. Carlyle, Ranger's favorite, waved them over. "Come on, boy," he said, voice gentle. Ranger trotted over, nuzzling Carlyle's knee. The inspector watched, clipboard in hand, taking meticulous notes. Suddenly, a commotion broke out near the window. Mrs. White, a frail resident, slumped in her chair, her face ashen and her breath coming in shallow gasps. The room erupted in panic. Without hesitation, Ranger sprang into action, letting out a sharp bark that cut through the noise and drew Daniel's attention. The dog nudged Mrs. White's arm, then barked again, more insistently, until Daniel rushed to her side. Daniel knelt, quickly assessing her. "She's having a stroke. Call 911, now!" Jane helped steady Mrs. White as staff dialed emergency services. Ranger remained close, pressing his body gently against the elderly woman, as if to anchor her to the present. When the paramedics arrived, they credited the quick response, especially the dog's alert, for likely saving her life. Fleming watched all of it, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. She approached Daniel quietly as the paramedics wheeled Mrs. White out. "That was impressive. Not every therapy animal would have responded like that." Daniel shrugged, voice raw. "He's not just any animal. He's a hero who never forgot how to serve, even after the world forgot him." Fleming nodded slowly, her demeanor shifting. "I'll be thorough, but I'll also be fair. I saw something here I can't put on a checklist. Don't lose that." The next day, the inspection report landed on Linda's desk. There were recommendations, more paperwork, updated policies, better volunteer tracking, but no citations, no shutdown. Instead, Fleming included a handwritten note. "Recommend continued observation and support for pilot therapy dog project. Special commendation to staff for animal care and community engagement." Relief and gratitude washed through the shelter. The volunteers gathered in the break room, sharing hugs, high fives, and tears. Even Linda, always composed, blinked back emotion as she read the note aloud. In the days that followed, the story of Ranger's quick-thinking rescue spread through town. Donations surged. The city council, once skeptical, invited Daniel and Jane to speak at a meeting about expanding the program. Veterans and seniors sent letters of thanks, and even Fleming returned to visit, this time as a supporter. But the biggest change was in Daniel. For the first time in years, he felt like he was building something lasting, not just for Ranger, but for every animal and person who'd ever needed a second chance. The shelter, once just a place to hold the forgotten, had become a place where adversity wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something better. After the tense inspection and Ranger's heroic rescue of Mrs. White, the Cedar Valley Animal Shelter found itself at the heart of a wave of goodwill that neither Daniel nor Linda could have predicted. For once, the shelter's phones rang off the hook, not with complaints or surrenders, but with donations, offers to volunteer, and heartfelt stories from people across Minnesota. In the city council's next meeting, the agenda included Therapy Dog Pilot Program Update, and this time, the seats were packed not just with officials, but with citizens eager to support what had started as a wild experiment. Daniel felt the shift everywhere. The shelter, once a place that carried the heavy scent of hopelessness, now buzzed with laughter and busy hands. Olivia, once shy and reserved, found her voice as she led volunteer orientations. Linda Evans, always cool under pressure, moved with new energy, fielding media requests and pitching the Therapy Dog Project to skeptical council members as a point of pride for Cedar Valley. Even local businesses got involved. A bakery sent over dog biscuits shaped like medals. The town hardware store donated a new fence for the play yard. And a car dealership held a free oil change for Shelter Supporters Day that doubled as a therapy dog meet and greet. But the change was most profound in the people Ranger had touched directly. Seniors at the community center, once quiet and withdrawn, now shared jokes and stories, waiting eagerly for Ranger's visits. Veterans who'd long avoided public spaces showed up for the chance to walk with him in the park. The line for therapy dog sessions grew so long that Jane Miller and Daniel had to develop a waiting list and train new volunteers just to keep up. And in the center of it all, Ranger flourished. His posture was more confident, his eyes brighter. Though he would sometimes tremble at sudden noises, he no longer shrank from the world. Instead, he leaned into it, trusting that the people around him would understand and help him through the worst of his fears. Daniel saw in the dog a lesson about recovery. Progress wasn't linear, but every step forward mattered. Among the new faces drawn to the shelter was Mike Hayes. He'd kept his distance since signing the paperwork that allowed Ranger to stay, haunted by guilt and a fear that he had nothing left to offer. But after seeing the news report on Ranger's role at the senior center, Mike found himself standing in the shelter lobby one morning, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Daniel spotted him from across the hall. "Hey, Mike, you here to see Ranger?" Mike looked down, embarrassed. "Yeah, I saw the news. I wanted to help out. Maybe clean kennels. I'm not looking for money or anything." Daniel smiled. "We always need help, but only if you're ready. How are you holding up?" Mike shrugged, a faint twitch betraying his nerves. "Better, I guess. I've been going to those meetings Sam told me about. I slipped once, but seeing Ranger, what you're doing here, it made me want to try again." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Mike's shoulder. "That's what second chances are for. We all stumble. What matters is getting back up and letting people help." With a nervous smile, Mike joined the team. At first, he stuck to the background, mopping floors, restocking supplies, working quietly alongside Olivia and the other volunteers. But it wasn't long before he found his footing. Ranger greeted him with a gentle nuzzle the first day. And each time Mike worked, the dog seemed to gravitate toward him, sensing something familiar in Mike's struggle. Daniel noticed the change. Mike, who had once been nearly invisible in his own pain, now stood a little taller. He even started opening up with the seniors, listening to their stories and eventually sharing a few of his own. One day he showed up for a shift with a brand new chip on his keychain, a small engraved tag that read, "Ranger's Way." "Found it at the hardware store," he said shyly. "Thought the program should have something official." Jane Miller watched this transformation with quiet pride. She encouraged Mike to join therapy sessions, first just observing, then helping guide some of the more anxious dogs through their routines. As the weeks passed, Mike grew into his role. He even attended his first volunteer group therapy meeting, his voice trembling but strong as he shared his journey with addiction and loss, and the hope he'd found through helping at the shelter. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself busier than ever. The therapy dog pilot had taken on a life of its own, and while there were days it felt like a whirlwind. Calls from reporters, paperwork, crisis after crisis. He never lost sight of what mattered most. The small, quiet moments. Ranger curled up at a senior's feet, a veteran's hand trembling as it stroked the dog's fur. Mike laughing for the first time in months. Each moment, Daniel thought, was proof that the project was working, that people and animals really could heal each other. Linda, too, felt the change. She'd started as the rule-bound director forced to enforce cutbacks and hard decisions. But seeing Ranger's impact, watching her staff and volunteers rally around the mission, reminded her why she'd gotten into animal welfare in the first place. She even surprised Daniel one day by showing up at the senior center with a box of homemade muffins and a gentle smile for the volunteers. "I wanted to say thank you," she admitted quietly. "You've all reminded me what this work is really about." As summer deepened, Cedar Valley found itself transformed by the therapy dog program. Families from out of town visited just to see Ranger. Local businesses sponsored events, and the shelter's once bleak annual fundraiser became a jubilant community picnic, complete with children's games, pet adoption booths, and a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newly refurbished Ranger's Way garden. Daniel, exhausted but fulfilled, sat on a bench beneath the garden's big oak tree at the end of the day, Ranger's head resting in his lap. "Look at what you started," he whispered, smiling. "You gave us all something to believe in." As the evening sun set over Cedar Valley, Daniel realized that the best kind of healing happens when a community rallies, not just around a cause, but around each other. And sometimes, it takes one scarred, noble dog to remind everyone what's possible when hope leads the way. As autumn crept gently into Cedar Valley, the leaves outside the shelter turned fiery orange and gold. The garden that the community now called Ranger's Way was thick with asters and sunflowers, their petals bowing under the first chill of the season. Daniel noticed how the world seemed to slow down, every morning cloaked in a soft mist. But within the shelter's walls, the days began to feel heavy for a different reason. Ranger was changing. It started subtly. He moved more slowly, sometimes limping after walks, his deep brown eyes clouded with fatigue. At first, Daniel told himself it was just old age catching up to a dog who had lived a dozen lives worth of hardship. But then came the cough, the shortness of breath, the days when Ranger refused his favorite treats. Jane Miller and Linda Evans noticed it too, trading worried glances during training sessions. Olivia, ever hopeful, would kneel beside him, whispering, "You're still the bravest boy, aren't you?" Daniel ran tests, searching for something easy to fix, an infection, maybe arthritis. But the x-rays told a different story. Cancer, advanced and aggressive, a diagnosis all too common for older German shepherds. The news hit Daniel like a hammer. He sat in the office long after closing, the files and charts untouched, as tears he'd held back for months finally fell. The next morning, Daniel called a staff meeting. "Ranger's been diagnosed with cancer. It's spreading fast," he said, voice raw. Silence fell, broken only by Olivia's soft sob. Mike Hayes, standing at the back, ran a trembling hand through his hair. "What do we do?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "We keep him comfortable," Jane said quietly. "We give him everything he loves. Walks, sunshine, friends. We make these days matter." Word spread quickly. The town that had rallied behind Ranger now gathered again, this time to say thank you and to cherish every moment left. Daniel arranged for Ranger to spend time at all his favorite places: the senior center, the park, the library where kids read stories while Ranger dozed at their feet. Mr. Carlyle, the veteran in the wheelchair, insisted on sharing his lunch every visit. "He's family," the old man said, patting Ranger's side. "Let's make sure he knows it." Mike spent long hours at the shelter, often arriving before sunrise. Sometimes he and Daniel would sit on the back porch with Ranger lying between them, sipping coffee and sharing memories. "You know," Mike said one morning, "I used to resent this dog. Thought he was a reminder of everything I'd lost. But now he's the reason I get up each day." Linda, who had once measured her success by spreadsheets and compliance charts, found herself stopping by Ranger's kennel with homemade biscuits and a gentle scratch behind his ears. "You've done more for this town than any policy ever could," she told him, her eyes shining. The community wanted to honor Ranger while he could still enjoy it. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, the shelter and senior center hosted a celebration in the garden. Tables were spread with food, music played softly, and a collage of photos displayed moments from Ranger's journey, from Afghanistan to Cedar Valley, from battered stray to therapy hero. People took turns sharing stories: a widowed teacher who'd found comfort in Ranger's silent presence, a child who'd overcome a stutter by reading to him, a veteran who'd learned to hope again. As the sun dipped low, Daniel knelt beside Ranger in the grass. The dog was tired, but his tail thumped as people stroked his fur and whispered their goodbyes. Tears flowed freely, but so did laughter. Someone had made a medal out of blue ribbon and pinned it to Ranger's collar. "You're always going to be our hero," a little girl said, hugging his neck. Later that evening, when most of the guests had gone, Daniel, Mike, Jane, Linda, Olivia, Sam Parker, and a handful of close friends gathered in the shelter's office. They reminisced about Ranger's first days, how he'd cowered in his kennel, how Daniel had almost given up hope, how a whole town had learned to open its heart because one scarred dog had refused to give up. Mike spoke last, his voice shaky but determined. "I'm grateful for second chances, for Ranger, for me, for all of us. He taught me that broken things can be made whole, even if it takes a while. I'm proud to have known him." The room was quiet for a long time, everyone lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the first stars pricked the indigo sky. Daniel put a hand on Ranger's head. "We'll be with you all the way, buddy. You're not leaving this world alone." As the days grew colder, Ranger's world narrowed to small, gentle pleasures: a patch of sunlight in the garden, the sound of Daniel's voice, the scent of autumn leaves. The pain medicine eased his discomfort, and Jane and Daniel made sure he never suffered. Every day, someone from the community stopped by to say hello, to bring a treat, to stroke his fur and say, "Thank you." The shelter felt different. Quieter, yes, but also filled with an odd sense of peace. Ranger's legacy was everywhere, in the smiles of the seniors, the confidence of the volunteers, the healing of people like Mike and Daniel, who had found hope in places they never expected. When the time finally came, Daniel lay on the floor beside Ranger, stroking his fur as the old dog drifted peacefully away. Tears fell freely, but there was no regret, only gratitude for a life that had touched so many, and for the bonds of love and loyalty that would linger long after Ranger was gone. In the heart of Cedar Valley, people understood. Saying goodbye was hard, but honoring a life well lived, no matter how brief or battered, was a gift worth sharing. The days after Ranger's passing moved slowly, as if Cedar Valley itself needed time to breathe. The garden was quieter now, the leaves rustling in gentle autumn wind, petals scattering like memories. Even the shelter, so recently alive with laughter and hope, seemed to mourn. Yet beneath the grief, there was a new kind of strength, a quiet pride, a sense that something profound had been left behind. Daniel Brooks felt it most on the morning he spoke at the city forum. For years, these meetings had meant paperwork, heated debates about budgets and animal control. Today, the room was packed with faces, seniors from the center, veterans, volunteers, families with children clutching homemade thank you cards. At the front of the room, a simple table held Ranger's collar and a framed photo of the dog lying peacefully in the garden. The sunlight caught the glass, painting the image in warm gold. Linda Evans stood first. She looked nervous, her usual armor of authority softened by recent months. "For a long time," she began, "I thought my job was about rules, policies, numbers, making sure we survived another year. I lost sight of what matters most, why I chose this work in the first place. Ranger reminded me that dignity and compassion have to come before everything else. He made me remember why I started." A hush followed her words, then a ripple of applause. Linda stepped aside for Sam Parker, who took the microphone with a steady hand. His Vietnam service pins caught the light on his worn jacket. "After I got home from the war, I didn't talk to anyone for a long time," he said. "You get used to being invisible, like the world's moving on without you. But Ranger, he didn't care what you'd done, or how long you'd been hurting. He just sat by you and listened. Because of him, I reached out again. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged." His voice broke, and the room was silent except for a few muffled sobs. Daniel watched the veterans in the crowd, some old, some young, leaning forward, eyes shining. He felt the weight of all their stories, the things left unsaid, but deeply understood. Next, it was Daniel's turn. He stood at the podium, hands clasped tight to keep them from trembling. "I spent most of my life in this town trying to do the right thing by the rules. But the truth is, rules aren't always enough. Ranger taught me that the end of a life, any life, animal or human, is sacred. It deserves respect, not just because it's the law, but because it's right." He paused, searching for words that could match the ache in his heart. "There were days when I felt alone, lost in my own regrets. But Ranger gave me a reason to try again. He showed us that healing doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to start. That compassion can bridge years of loneliness. That redemption is possible at any stage, for anyone willing to risk a little hope." Mike Hayes, sitting in the third row, looked down at his hands. His journey had not been easy. Recovery rarely was. But Ranger's acceptance, the second chance he'd received, gave him a sense of purpose he'd never known before. When Daniel finished, Mike surprised everyone by rising and walking slowly to the front. He cleared his throat, voice shaking but strong. "I'm not proud of everything I've done. I made mistakes, ran from responsibility, let my grief turn me bitter. But Ranger, he didn't judge me. He just wanted someone to show up, to be there. I started helping at the shelter thinking I was giving back. But the truth is, I was the one being saved. I'm grateful for forgiveness, for second chances, for the family I found here. His words hung in the air, raw and real. Several in the audience wiped away tears. Olivia, standing at the side of the room, squeezed Linda's hand. Jane Miller leaned over to whisper to Daniel, "This is what legacy looks like. This is how it spreads." One by one, people shared what Ranger had meant to them. Mrs. Schmidt from the senior center described how the dog brought joy back to the lives of those who had lost so much. A little boy in a blue jacket spoke shyly about how reading to Ranger made him brave enough to try reading aloud in class. Even Fleming, the city inspector who had once threatened to shut the shelter down, sent a letter that Daniel read aloud. What I saw in Cedar Valley wasn't just animal care. It was a lesson in dignity for everyone at every stage of life. The forum ended with a moment of silence. Outside, the sun dipped behind the maple trees, gold and crimson falling on the garden where Ranger had so often lain. As people filed out, Daniel stood quietly by the memorial table. Linda joined him, her voice low. "Do you think he knew what he meant to us?" Daniel nodded, smiling through tears. "I think he felt it. Every time someone reached out, every time someone chose kindness over convenience, he knew." That night, Cedar Valley glowed with the warmth of remembered kindness. Ranger's lesson echoed everywhere. That true community means showing up for the vulnerable, the lonely, and the forgotten, not just with words, but with actions. In the end, Ranger was more than a dog, more than a hero. He was a bridge between the wounded and the healers, the past and the future, loss and hope. And as Daniel locked up the shelter, pausing in the garden beneath the stars, he realized that the truest measure of a legacy isn't what you leave behind, but who you inspire to go forward with dignity and grace. In the weeks following the city forum, autumn surrendered quietly to winter in Cedar Valley. Frost edged the windows each morning, and the sun rose late over the shelter's garden, painting Ranger's memorial plaque in soft golden light. The Ranger's Way garden became a place of pilgrimage, a sanctuary not only for those grieving lost pets, but for anyone seeking comfort, connection, or a reminder that second chances were possible. Daniel Brooks found himself spending more time in the garden than ever before. The winding paths, dotted with engraved stones bearing the names of beloved animals, seemed to whisper stories with every breeze. Ranger's plaque stood at the heart, a hero, a healer, a friend, gone but never forgotten. Visitors left flowers, photographs, and notes. A single dog tag, a child's crayon drawing of a German shepherd, a letter from a soldier who had finally found peace. The therapy dog program, once an experiment and a gamble, had blossomed into a thriving institution. Ranger's Way now partnered with regional shelters, training retired service dogs and shelter dogs alike for new lives as therapy animals. The waiting list was months long. Veterans from across the county made trips to Cedar Valley, eager to work with the dogs who, like them, carried invisible wounds. Seniors from the community center strolled the garden, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups, always with a dog beside them. Linda Evans, no longer just the by-the-book director, became a champion for humane policies across the city. With Daniel's help, she secured grants, partnered with local businesses, and brought in experts to teach best practices. The shelter, once scraping by, now bustled with volunteers and foster families. Olivia, whose shy optimism had once been easily overlooked, was promoted to volunteer coordinator, her confidence blooming with every successful match between dog and human. One of the most remarkable transformations was that of Mike Hayes. He remained a steady presence at the shelter, mentoring newcomers and leading support groups for veterans and those battling addiction. Mike's journey was never linear. Some days were harder than others, and grief still found him in quiet moments. But he carried Ranger's tag on his keychain, a reminder that healing, while never perfect, was always possible. Sam Parker often sat with Daniel in the garden, sharing coffee and quiet reflection. "You know, I always thought legacies were for people with buildings named after them," Sam mused one frosty morning. "Turns out, sometimes it's a dog that leaves the biggest mark." Daniel smiled, warmed by the memory. "Ranger changed me too. I think he changed all of us." "Yeah," Sam agreed. "And he keeps changing people, long after he's gone." As winter deepened, the shelter held its first day of remembrance. Families, seniors, veterans, and volunteers gathered in the garden beneath strands of golden lights. They shared stories of loss, yes, but also of hope, forgiveness, and second chances. Ranger's story was retold by a local high schooler who had struggled with anxiety and learned courage while walking him. Mrs. Schmidt spoke about the Ranger effect at the senior center, how even the most withdrawn residents had found new reasons to smile. Daniel led a moment of silence, his hand resting gently on Ranger's memorial. In the weeks that followed, Daniel prepared for his retirement. The decision came easily. The program was thriving, the staff more than ready. He spent his last days training the new head veterinarian, a bright, compassionate young woman named Dr. Harris, and documenting every lesson he'd learned, not just about medicine, but about trust, resilience, and kindness. On his final morning, Daniel walked through the shelter with Ranger's leash coiled gently in his palm. The halls were filled with life, dogs being let out for therapy sessions, cats curled on sunny window ledges, volunteers laughing over coffee. In the garden, Olivia, Mike, Linda, and Jane waited for him. Linda hugged him, surprising them both. "Thank you, Daniel, for believing in this and for fighting for every single one of them." Mike clasped Daniel's hand, emotion thick in his voice. "I wouldn't be here without you, or Ranger. I'm proud to call you both friends." Dr. Jane Miller added, "You taught us all how to heal, by loving what's broken, not by pretending it's perfect." Daniel's eyes misted as he looked around the circle. "It was never just me. It was all of us. Ranger gave us the courage to hope again. Our job now is to keep giving that hope to others." Before leaving, Daniel sat quietly in the garden, snow swirling softly around Ranger's plaque. As he watched a little girl kneel beside it, laying a painted stone in the shape of a heart, he felt the ache of loss give way to gratitude. He remembered Ranger's head resting in his lap, the dog's quiet trust, the way his presence had soothed so many battered souls. The echoes of his life would not fade. Every time a lonely veteran found solace, every time a frightened child found courage, every time someone chose compassion over indifference, Ranger's legacy lived on. The courage to do what's right, especially for those who can't speak for themselves, is what makes a legacy. True dignity, Daniel realized, is found in compassion, in standing up for the vulnerable, in believing that every life, no matter how broken, is worthy of love. As he walked away from the shelter for the last time, Daniel didn't look back with regret. Instead, he felt hope rising, soft and powerful, sure that Ranger's way would endure in Cedar Valley, and wherever kindness was needed most.